Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before we rank each episode against each other. Today's episode is Grey's Anatomy, Season 1, Episode 4, No Man's Land. We'll now get the episode in a nutshell, which is just a 1 to 2 line summary about exactly what happens within this episode. Jorge Cruz comes in with nails in his head before discovering a tumor, while Liz arrives for end-of-life care, and Isabel's modeling career comes back to haunt her. We'll now go into a more detailed summary of the show, going scene by scene and giving our opinions as we go. Meredith sits at her desk, writing a check to the long-term care home where Ellis is staying, while Izzy and George are getting ready for their day. Izzy is walking around the house in her underwear, and George is mortified by her lack of personal boundaries. When she walks in to brush her teeth while he's in the shower and potentially uses his toothbrush, it's not confirmed, but she may have, he continues then to complain all the way to the hospital. But both Meredith and Izzy laugh him off, and Izzy reminds him that they're out of tampons, asking him to add it to his list as it's his turn to do the shopping. He says that as a man, he doesn't want to pick up feminine products or see Izzy in her underwear, but she says she doesn't care and he can look if he wants to. It doesn't bother her as they enter the hospital. I think Izzy missed the point. It isn't that it would bother her, but that it bothers him. And when people express a boundary, if you care about them, you should respect that boundary or at least show that you're making an effort to do so. Obviously, when you're living in close quarters to people, incidents sometimes will happen, but if you're showing that you're making an effort, I feel like those incidents are more forgivable. However, at the same time, I don't see why George thinks men don't buy tampons. If you take turns doing the groceries and tampons need to be on the list, the worst a cashier is going to think is, oh, this person has a wife, a daughter, a girlfriend. It really would not make a difference, and it doesn't say anything about your masculinity to pick up tampons. So I don't know why he's protesting that. I don't know why he thinks it's a big deal, because genuinely, as Meredith and Izzy said, it really isn't. Bailey walks around the locker room, lecturing all of the interns on the best way to approach patients during rounds. Alex and Izzy off to the side have a little name-calling session where he calls her Dr. Model and she calls him Dr. Evil Spawn. Then Alex comments on her tattoo, asking if the magazines airbrushed it out, while she comes back about a 666 on his skull. Meredith hopes to get good cases, and Christina brags that she was in early and plans to get a surgery that day. But she won't share with Meredith what information she found out, commenting about her not sleeping with an attending. Meredith protests, but as she goes to follow her, Derek then shows up. Derek wants to take Meredith out for breakfast. He wants to take her out before her rounds, but she already ate a leftover grilled cheese, and he calls that sad. They flirt a bit, with the outcome being her asking him to be more professional, and then he says, very loudly, that it was nice talking to you, Dr. Gray. Bailey looks around for a specific chart, but is unable to find it. Honestly, again, I feel like the Derek Meredith thing is kind of dragging on at this point, where, like last episode, I felt like we had some progress with the locker room, with them kind of having their little moments, clarifying their intentions, that it's not just the chase, that he genuinely likes her. And now I feel like we're back to square one. But again, we know the future, so it doesn't bother me as much as it otherwise would if I didn't know the future, but it is starting to just drag out a little bit too long. Christina roughly enters Liz's room and is scolded for turning on the light and banging the door open which ends up waking Liz up rather rudely. She tells Christina the trick she's using, getting in early to grab her chart, then doing the exam to impress Dr. Burke so he'll pick her for the surgery. And due to being a former scrub nurse, she also tells her what procedure she's hoping to get, saying that she knows all the tricks. And then they introduce themselves to each other. Meanwhile, Izzy wakes up Mr. Humphreys and begins to do his checkup, but once he gets a good look at her face, he starts freaking out before pulling up a magazine picture of her, and then he kicks her out to go get Bailey or literally anybody else. One thing I like about this scene is that it seems like Christina's kind of met her match. Christina, she's sharp, she's no nonsense, she doesn't really care, and Liz basically calls her out on it immediately and knows all of the tricks that she's trying to pull and isn't shy about telling her that she knows them. In the case of this patient with Izzy, I have I have split feelings. On the one hand, I understand that it's clarified later what his real issue is, but in this early scene, it really comes off like his issue is that she's a model. And I've mentioned this before, I think I mentioned it episode 1. Being a model doesn't mean that you're stupid. It means that you're pretty, but it doesn't mean that you're stupid. She went through medical school. She got out debt-free, most likely. And she obviously passed all of her studies. She passed with good enough grades to get into the program, and now she is working as a doctor. Having good looks does not mean that you don't have brains, or vice versa, and the implication that it does is kind of offensive. In the hallway, George is still complaining about Izzy's lack of boundaries and is asking Meredith to intercede on his behalf as it's her house. She thinks he has a crush on Izzy, but he says she's not the one he likes, and she teases him about there being a one until Bailey interrupts to send them and Alex down to trauma where Shepard needs their help. And Meredith is confused because she thought he was in surgery, as he had mentioned that earlier when they were talking about breakfast. But Bailey says that he was pulled before he could start that surgery, and then when they arrive in trauma, Meredith sees that the imaging on the screen shows that there are nails in the patient's head from a nail gun. The patient, surprisingly, is repeating that he can't see and asking for his wife. Meredith tries to keep him calm and still telling him his wife is on her way. Derek then asks for a CT, but learns that the machines are down. But Alex comes up with a solution, and George is sent to research if anything like it has ever happened before. Obviously, the main thing about this scene to note is that it's a very interesting case. The concept of nails from a nail gun being inside somebody's head and them still being conscious, being able to survive that, it's a strong concept for the episode, and it immediately makes me want to watch this episode more than some of the other ones because this is a really, truly interesting case. Of course, we then also still have the whole George is complaining about a lack of boundaries, and Meredith kind of misses that. He says Izzy's not the one he's attracted to, therefore implying as the only other female there that he would be attracted to her, and just teases him about there being a one, assuming, of course, that it's somewhere else because for her, he's completely friend-zoned at this point. But again, like, he was also complaining about her boundaries too because she needs the tampons as well, and he's refusing to buy those. So I think they're both kind of ignoring his boundaries, though Izzy is doing it more so than Meredith is. But again, it's not really Meredith's place. They're all adults. Yes, it is our house, but as they are both adults, he really should handle it. If Izzy's the one he has a problem with, he should handle it between him and Izzy. Christina gives updates on Liz's stats to Burke when Richard comes into the room to greet Liz. Liz outs Christina stealing her chart, and he says that he was planning to give her to Meredith originally because she used to be Ellis's old scrub nurse. But unfortunately, Meredith is with a guy with nails in his head. Liz then makes fun of Christina, saying that Meredith got the human 2x4 and she got stuck with her. Basically, a scene to say that Christina's ambition backfired on her. And it's that simple. Meredith gets a medical history from Jorge, who still has a sense of humor, saying he's had headaches, but nothing compared to now, because he has nails in his head, telling her his wife will say, "Why do you think they call it a gun?" He says she hates the things, and Meredith says, with good reason, as Sona walks in with Derek and runs to his side, and Derek tells Meredith to get a history from her as well before she scrubs in on the surgery. Again, it's a very short scene, but I do like that the character's mindset is very positive. Even though he has nails sticking out of his head, he still has a sense of humor. And of course, he and his wife immediately, he's asking for his wife in that very first scene when we meet him. She comes in, and the first thing she does is run to him. And I think that they're a really likable characters and really likable couple. In the research room, George finds out that people were shot with nail guns in their head 23 times, but Alex is more interested in if Izzy and Meredith really walk around in their underwear. And George answers that they do some of the time. And Alex says it's like they're sisters, and George protests he doesn't think of them as sisters, but Alex points out that they think of him as not as someone who's not going to do anything. They've brother zoned, friend zoned him. Bailey then goes in to do Mr. Humphrey's biopsy with Izzy, but as soon as he sees her, he starts yelling for her to get out, and Bailey has to let her leave, but is completely confused as to why he's so upset. George, of course, in this scene lets Alex get to him, although he really should be a little bit more self-aware at this point. It's kind of a running joke for now 4 episodes that he is completely unattractive, and to me at least, a very dislikable character. But then also, in the second part of the scene, when with the Izzy and Bailey, I feel like that would be very embarrassing. Just you're doing your job, you go in, and then someone immediately, for no reason and no without any provocation, starts yelling at you to get out of the place in front of your boss. That would be humiliating. And I feel a little bit sorry for Izzy that she got yelled at like that in front of Bailey, especially with Bailey looking so confused about what is happening between her and the patient, because she doesn't know anything, but then Izzy doesn't really know anything either. Meredith speaks to Sona, who asks her if Jorge will be able to see again, because he likes taking pictures. Meredith then asks her about his headaches and asks if she's seen him have any dizziness or disorientation. And Sona has to think about it, but then she says that she has seen him like that. And again, with this scene, it's very short, so there's not much to say. But I do like how, and you'll see in future scenes as well, that this couple really loves each other and they really know each other well. And the fact that she's so concerned about his sight so that he can continue the hobbies that she knows he loves is really sweet. I feel like Sona and Jorge are very much relationship goals, and it's very, very cute. Which also, well, we'll talk about everything at the end of the episode. Once Bailey finishes the biopsy, she comes out of the room to find Izzy waiting, and Bailey asks her what that was all about, and she tells her that he's probably crazy, before hesitating and then confessing that while she was in medical school, she modeled. And recently, a Bethany Whisper photo shoot from the previous year has been printed, and she says that it might be better to assign a different intern to this patient. Bailey refuses to do so and tells her that she is a doctor and he's a patient, and gives her the samples to biopsy, saying if they come back positive, she expects her to be in surgery. I like how Bailey stands up for Izzy in this case. She could easily have replaced her with a different intern, but instead she encourages Izzy, saying she's a doctor, she's put in the work. She gives her the sample to test, and she also lets her know that she's not going to lose an opportunity over this patient's behavior, that she's going to take her time, take her side, and that Izzy is still going to have the opportunity to scrub in if a surgery is needed. And I think that that is very good for Bailey, like about Bailey. That's one of the things that makes her so likable, is that even though she's straight up no nonsense, she's also loyal and she's kind and she's taking Izzy's side as she should in this case. Meredith updates Derek on the history that she took from Sona, suggesting that based on Sona's words, he might have a tumor. Derek tells her that she needs to find horses, not zebras, saying they need to focus on getting the nails out before they go looking for anything else. Derek then gets on the phone with Alex, who reports that the research findings of 22 viable cases and what led to the best outcomes, but nothing he says is significant enough to help him, as it was just things that they were already planning to do anyways. Then George leaves the research room, and Alex looks at Izzy's photo shoot before making copies of her picture on a photocopy machine. In the operating room, the gallery is full, and Jorge is telling Meredith about Sona's love of the color red, recalling a memory of driving her to a field of poppies and her getting out and having a great time in the field while she's wearing red, while the flowers are red, all while Derek prepares him for the surgery. I definitely notice at this point that they are trying so hard to make you care about Jorge and Sona and their relationship. They keep spouting out all these lovely memories. They keep talking about each other, how much love they have for each other, and keeping their positive mindset. They've really tried their absolute hardest to make these characters as likable as possible, and it worked because they are very likable characters, and we are rooting for them. In a hallway, Bailey consults with another doctor, Dr. Harry Victor, about the results of the biopsy. The doctor agrees they'll be able to get all of the cancer out, but it will leave Humphrey impotent. When Bailey suggests that they can spare some of the nerves, he tells her he doesn't take risks with cancer. Once he leaves, Bailey tells Izzy that the doctor's nickname is Limp Harry because he never spares the nerves. Dr. Harry Victor also, as he's leaving, makes an offhanded comment about making his tea time after, like his golf tea time after the surgery, and it clearly shows that this doctor is one that's not really caring about the patients. They're more in it for the money, and obviously he cares more about his golf game than he does about the patient and the patient's quality of life after the cancer is removed. Richard, while he's watching the surgery, narrates for the gallery what exactly is happening on the surgical floor. Derek begins to remove the nails carefully, and in the gallery, George, Alex, and Christina watch, with Christina unable to hide her jealousy and complaining that Burke is running her ragged. Then Burke coincidentally happens to lean forward from further in the gallery and sends her to do even more tests. And when she hesitates, he asks if she really wants her surgery. She reluctantly leaves as Izzy arrives and gives George her share of the grocery money, reminding him to get tampons in front of everybody. And Alex, of course, makes fun of George, leading to George leaving the gallery. I do agree with George in this one instance that perhaps a gallery full of your coworkers is not the place for Izzy to bring up getting tampons. But again, I'm going to reiterate that there's nothing wrong with a guy picking up tampons. At worst, the cashier, and I was a cashier at one point, at worst, the cashier would assume, oh, he's got a girlfriend, a wife, a mother, a daughter. He's got some woman in his life who happens to need tampons, and it's his turn to do the shopping. No cashier anywhere ever is going to look at a guy buying tampons and think, is this for him? Does he have a fetish? That's the last thing anyone's going to be thinking. So I still don't get the big deal, but I do admit that George was right, that timing specifically, maybe not the best timing for her to bring it up. As per Burke's orders, Christina takes Liz for an MRI, And Liz tells her that she's always categorized surgeons into two categories, those that remember their patients and those that do not. And Christina assumes that those who remember are the best, but Liz says that she didn't say that, saying that some of the best surgeons distance themselves on purpose. And Christina asks for the qualifier she knows is coming, but then Liz is greeted by many of the staff as they roll through the halls who recognize her from her time employed at the hospital. On the one hand, it's nice to be remembered. On the other hand, we never get the qualifier. I now am curious for life on what the but was. What was she going to say? That those who remember are some of the best. And then Christina's like, there's a but coming, and the but never comes. Why? Because she gets distracted by all the people who remember her, and it's so nice that they do remember her and that they're coming up to greet her and everything. But I, as the audience, I might have wanted to know what she had to say, and now I don't, and now I never will. And it's disappointing because now I will live in curiosity for eternity. Back with Jorge's surgery, Derek takes out the last nail, saying that he doesn't think they've made it any worse, but the optic nerve is the biggest concern, saying they'll know by morning whether or not he will get his vision back. Meredith asks if she should order an MRI, but Derek declines, saying that Jorge needs to stabilize and they can do one the next day. The gallery clears out as the surgery ends, and Christina arrives just as it ends, missing it because she was doing the test with Liz. She then looks at the surgery board, but doesn't see a surgery scheduled for Liz. She goes to confront Burke about there being no surgery, asking if he wants her to schedule one. He says he wants to wait for more tests, confirming that she's on call, and she hesitates for a moment before saying that she guesses she's on call, confirming again that there will be a surgery. Burke tells her that Liz has cancer. They'll definitely be doing something. And we as the audience note that Christina completely misses that doing something doesn't equal surgery. Because Burke never said they were going to do a surgery. He just said that she has cancer and they're going to do something. And this is something that Christina doesn't pick up on. And she continues somewhat satisfied with the answer that he gave her. Liz's room is full of well-wishers that clear out, and once they've cleared out, she notices Meredith hovering. Meredith comes in and says that her mother was, and she tells Meredith that her mother was a bigger woman. And Meredith notes that she was her scrub nurse, saying that she came to give regards from Ellis. But Liz says that Ellis has no regards for anyone but Ellis, asking where she is now, and Meredith says that she's traveling, which Liz again says doesn't sound like Ellis, but Meredith would know that. Then she asks if she's practicing, and Meredith says not so much. So Liz then asks if she's well, and Meredith hesitates before saying she's fine, and she just wanted to give regards before she leaves. But once Meredith leaves, we can tell by the look on Liz's face that she isn't convinced at all. If Meredith wanted to keep her mother's condition a secret, giving regards to Liz was probably the worst miscalculation because obviously Liz saw right through her from the start. Everything she said, that doesn't sound like Ellis, but you would know that. This doesn't sound like your mother, but you would know that. And so clearly, if she wanted it a secret, which she has been keeping it secret, so at this point that's safe to assume, this was a miscalculation because Liz saw right through her because Liz knows her mother maybe even better than she does. We then get a scene where Meredith is visiting Ellis at her care home and showing her pictures to remind her about their family. Shows childhood pictures of Meredith Ellis and their father, Thatcher Gray. But then she mentions Liz was in the hospital. And Ellis immediately brightens, remembering Liz and saying that she loves her and asking if she's still a scrub nurse, saying that she was fantastic. And this shocks Meredith. It's a very short scene, and it's also a very sad scene because Ellis spent so little time with their family that she's completely forgotten her family. And yet the people that she worked with, that were just part of her job, like Liz, are the people that she's actually able to remember. And as her daughter, that must hurt Meredith a great deal that she isn't remembered. But a scrub nurse who just worked with her mother for a time is somebody that she brightens up and talks about loving and wanting to know about and remembering. And that's part of the tragedy, I think, of Alzheimer's as well, is that, what they remember may not necessarily be the most important or impactful things, and that can hurt those who loved them, like Meredith. Back at the house, Izzy scolds George for forgetting the tampons when she had reminded him before he went shopping. And she's doing this while he's in the shower. She calls him passive aggressive, and he says men don't buy tampons. And she says he'll need to get over the man thing. Meredith walks in to look in the cupboard, and Izzy says she's not riding to work with George. Meredith asks about the tampons, and Izzy tells her that George didn't buy them. And she walks out angry, and so does Meredith. But George doesn't think that he did anything wrong. Now, I think George did something wrong. But so did Izzy. First off, for Izzy, maybe wait until he's out of the shower, out of the bathroom. That's a major pushing a boundary, and that's the one boundary I do think George has valid concerns about, is like maybe when he's having a shower, when he's naked, you don't walk into the bathroom on him and start talking to him. Maybe you avoid that. That is where he's right. Again with the tampon thing, George keeps saying, men don't buy tampons. Men don't buy tampons. Yes, they do. If it's their turn to do the shopping and one of the females that they live with happens to be bleeding and need them, they do. Any man who is secure in themselves would not see a problem with it because they would not see that there is anything wrong. They know that nobody's going to think that they're the ones using them. It's obvious any cashier is going to say, no, actually, it's somebody, a female, in their life that needs them, and this person is just nice enough to pick them up. But because George is so insecure in his masculinity, which is fair because it has been shown to us time and time again throughout the show and the previous 3 episodes that George is not very masculine of a man, because he is so insecure, he is now leaving his roommates to bleed all over the place because he couldn't be bothered to pick up all the items on the list because he is so insecure that he would leave them hanging, and that is just unacceptable. Tampons are not something that people get because they want them. They get them because they need them, because they are bleeding, and they are going to bleed all over the place if they don't get these tampons and you purposefully forgot them because of your insecurity and your masculinity. I don't like George. I've said it several times, and while I have made an effort to say it less, I will say it here. I don't like George as a character at all, and he never grows on me throughout this entire series. Maybe this rewatch will be different, but generally, I don't care about George. I don't like George. When Meredith gets to the hospital, Derek comes around and asks if she had grilled cheese for breakfast this morning as well. She replies that she had cold pizza before handing him the chart for Jorge. He asks how Jorge is, and she smiles, and then he walks in, and Jorge says that he's able to see, making them all happy. Meanwhile, Izzy and George arrive at the hospital angry, and Izzy demands that he take the stairs while she takes the elevator. When she gets in the elevator, all the men laugh and look at her, and she asks what before the doors close. And when the doors close, we then show a giant blown up image of her magazine shoot on the outside of the elevator doors. There's not much to say about the scene. It's just showing the continuation of the fight that continued before, and also the prank, if you can call it a prank, is foreshadowed that Alex played. Alex's prank is foreshadowed. Christina once again wakes Liz up by banging the door open and turning on the lights, and once again Liz scolds her, saying that's not how you wake a patient up. Christina says to forgive her since she didn't get much sleep as she was on call. Liz says she'd rather be at the hospital, and then she asks what she has at home. Christina says she has a bed, and then Liz counters that there's beds there, asking Burke, who's in the doorway, to tell her that the hospital is their lives, and he smiles. Christina picks up the chart and asks to speak with Burke, leaving the room. Again, very short scene. There really isn't much to say. It kind of explains itself. But it is true that the life that Liz describes Christina has is kind of sad from an ordinary person perspective. Of course, Christina is very ambitious. She's achieving her dreams. She's going after her goals. So it probably doesn't seem so sad to her. But as an audience member, it seems like a sad life where your entire life revolves around work. And the most you can say about your home, what's waiting for you there, is that it has a bed. Izzy arrives to a hubbub in the locker room and asks what's going on, but George tries to block her way. Then, when she pushes past him and walks into the locker room anyways, all of the men that are in there wolf whistle because Alex decided to post her photo shoot all over the locker room. And then he shushes everyone, saying that they have Bethany whisper in the room, saying he guesses they do airbrush out the tattoo. Upset, Izzy asks if he really wants to see. Then she starts taking off her clothes and making a scene. She then turns to Alex and tells him it's fine if he wants to call her Dr. Model, because while he's sitting on piles of student loans, she's out of debt, before grabbing her clothes and storming from the room. Now, in this scene, Alex is out of line. It was a cruel prank, but at the same time, it's a publicly available image that's in the magazine. Anyone who picked up the magazine would be able to see it. It's no secret that she was a model. So while it's kind of a cruel prank because he's not coming at it from a trying to be funny point, it still generally isn't the worst prank that's ever happened because it is that, and I think the only reason it was as offensive to her as it was is because of the patient, Mr. Humphrey's situation going on at the same time. But at the same time, it is also cruel of Alex to go ahead and post it everywhere. And it's not just Alex, but every single male intern that was in that locker room who wolf whistled at her is complicit. And they are also very out of line because they were the ones wolf whistling. They were the ones who made her feel objectified. And that is where the anger comes in. You know, for Alex, it probably was a fun prank. Like I said, he kind of gives the brotherly vibes, like the prankster older brother that's picking on his siblings. That's kind of the vibe I get from him. And that, again, could be colored because I know where his character grows to end up. But I don't think that he meant specifically a large amount of harm with this particular prank. I think he thought it was going to be funny and that she might be upset about it, but that it wouldn't be too big of a deal. But because she's already dealing with things in the background, because the other interns piled on and did the wolf whistling, she snapped. She had a huge reaction, and you can kind of see on his face when she leaves that he kind of does regret it. He does feel that regret. You can see it in the character's face that, ooh, this blew up and maybe not in the way that I intended. So in this case, he and all of the other male interns were completely out of line. And honestly, I think she should make a report to their HR and get them little docs on their record to make sure that if they continue to act up, that appropriate action is taken. But I feel like the intention of Alex behind the prank wasn't necessarily malicious, but more from that brotherly place of picking on people who he deems sibling-like. Derek performs various tests and checks on Jorge while Jorge and Sona flirt together. He then tells them that everything looks good, but that he needs an MRI to check for any residual bleeding, and he leaves the room while the couple kiss behind him. Back with Izzy, Izzy puts a photo down in front of Mr. Humphreys, her magazine photo, the photocopy that Alex took, saying that that is who she was, not who she is. And she is a surgeon, just as qualified as every other intern in the hospital. So he has to get over his chauvinistic crap and let her do her job. He tells her that he's sure she's a very good doctor. So then she asks what his problem with her is. He tells her that he's fantasized about the person in the photo, and due to his cancer, he's about to be effectively neutered. And he asks if it's so hard to understand why he wouldn't want her to witness his emasculation. And Izzy looks sad but doesn't really say anything. Now, Izzy, we've established, is a very empathetic character, so I'm sure she actually could understand. I, however, do not have the level of empathy necessary to understand what he's saying here. I really don't think it would make much of a difference if a person that you fantasized about, if you met them in person after you were no longer able to experience pleasure, would be like the worst thing in the world. I don't really get why he would be upset about that. I don't have the empathy to extend that far to really understand myself. So for me, the scene kind of falls flat because I'm like, I don't understand. But I do like the fact that his issue with her isn't that she was a model, because I've mentioned it a few times that I don't think that should be an issue at all. But I also don't really understand his actual reason. I don't have the empathy to do so. But based on Izzy's reaction, it seems that she does have that level of empathy to be able to understand what he's saying. Christina finally catches on and confronts Burke about not scheduling a surgery, saying that he's acting like the only reason Liz is in the hospital is to die. Burke looks at her significantly, and she realizes that that is in fact the case, that Liz is only in the hospital to die, and then Burke walks away from her. A very short snippet scene. Like I said, Christina finally caught on. Most of us would have caught on at the part where he said, he didn't promise a surgery, but just said she has cancer, we'll do something. And what the something that they're doing is basically providing her with comfort in her final moments as she is dying. But I also think that's not fair to Christina because they all knew she wanted the surgery. She was doing all of this extra work in order to get that surgery, taking Liz for tests that she didn't actually need to have because she was not intending to have the surgery. And they essentially used her, wasted her time, and that really wasn't fair to her, professionally or even just personally. So it does kind of bother me that they did that, but at the same time, she's the one who missed the hints. Right when he said, well, they'll certainly do something, she could have probably walked away from the case there, but she kept with it because she still didn't pick up on that and thought she was getting her surgery. During Jorge's MRI, Meredith and Derek do in fact find the tumor that Meredith suspected would be there. Derek then gives Jorge the options. They can cut out 99% and with radiation get him 5 to 10 good years, but he will likely lose his memory and his personality will be altered. Or option 2, they use less invasive measures that will let him keep his memories and who he is, but will only get him 3 to 5 years. Sona starts crying and even Meredith wipes away a tear. Derek leaves them to discuss their options, saying that they can ask him anything they need before leaving, and Meredith gathers the chart before she also leaves. Now, I know no one asked, but if I was given these options, I personally would choose option 2. I have always thought that life, the quality of life, is just as important as the length of life. And if you are cutting your quality of life in order to lengthen your life, I personally don't find that worth it. I mean, obviously, if you can have a great quality of life and a great length of life, that is the ideal. But if I had to choose quality versus length, I would always pick my quality of life over the length of life. But we'll see in future scenes what this couple chooses. Meredith returns to Liz's room, and Liz wakes up. Meredith then tells her that she told her mother about her, and she remembered her very well. Liz comments that Ellis Gray never forgot a thing, sending Meredith into a fit of hysterical laughter. When she gets a hold of herself, she apologizes, saying it's not really funny, and Liz asks what Ellis's diagnosis is. Meredith tells her that it's early onset Alzheimer's, and Liz deduces she doesn't want anyone to know, which Meredith confirms, saying she's in a care home, and the only one who can see her is Meredith. Liz deduces that the home probably had to sign a contract to that effect, and Meredith comments that she knows her mother very well. Then Liz calls Ellis a B word, and they both laugh. I think this is a nice bonding scene between two strangers who have an acquaintance in common, or in this case, a mother slash coworker in common. And I'm also glad that Meredith told her, given that she is the one who Ellis remembered, not Meredith, not anybody else, but Liz. So I like that she went ahead and told her, even though she's also dying. So also it kind of mitigates any sort of risk factor because she doesn't have to worry about anybody else finding out because the person that she's told is, oh, this is going to sound so mean, but the person that she told is literally taking it to her grave. And with that, I'm going to end this scene. Outside, Christina complains to Izzy about not getting a surgery, while Izzy says it's sweet of the hospital since Liz's life revolved around the place, but Christina says that it's a waste of resources and a bed, and if it was her, she'd want them to do all that they could to save her. Meredith then arrives, and Christina mentions the picture of Izzy, saying that if she looked like her, she wouldn't bother to have skills. She then asks if Izzy knows if they hate her, knows that they hate her, while passing the magazine over to Meredith. Izzy gets a pager call from Bailey, and then she ignores it. And Christina asks if she's really going to skip the surgery, and Izzy shrugs, putting on her coat before leaving. Bailey and George help Humphrey onto a gurney as Izzy arrives. Bailey scolds her for not answering her pager, saying that George is doing her prep. She tells Bailey that she can't because he doesn't want her there, and Bailey says what he wants is to not have cancer, and tells her if she wants to stay in the scrub room, that's her choice. And again, I feel like in these early episodes, Izzy is maybe just a little bit too empathetic to be a doctor. I feel like there has to be a balance between your heart and your brain, and Izzy seems to be all heart and very little brain. I mean, obviously, when I say brain, I mean like logical thinking, not actual intelligence. And when I say heart, I mean emotional thinking rather than like letting her heart lead her type thing, just to clarify. But Izzy seems to always lead with her heart, and she's literally giving up an opportunity to be part of a surgery, which is what all of the interns supposedly want. And again, I don't really understand why. And also, the patient, Mr. Humphreys, he's going to be out during the surgery. So he's not going to know if she's there or not. So waiting until he gets, like George did the prep work, that was a kindness, but I don't see why she would give up the surgery, especially since his reason is very flimsy at best. Inside Sona and Jorge's room, we get the tail end of Derek's conversation with them, saying that he's going to do his best. Once he leaves, he tells Meredith that they want to go ahead with the surgery, which surprises her. With Christina, Christina watches Liz, who is struggling to breathe. When Liz notices her, she tells her they never were going to operate, and Christina says she could have told her, but Liz says to think of it like a hazing ritual. Christina holds her hand, and then the alarms start going off on all of the machines as Liz fades away. Then back with Meredith, she gazes into Jorge's room when Sona gets up, and then she calls out to Sona. Back with Christina, the code team arrives, but Tyler, the nurse, tells them that the chart is DNR, do not resuscitate, scolding Christina for doing chest compressions. Meredith, now talking with Sona, tries to convince her to change her mind, saying even if Jorge is there 5 years without his memory, he won't be him. Sona becomes agitated, which gets Derek's attention, who comes over asking her what she is doing. Meredith says that Sona needs to understand asking if 10 bad years is really worth more than 5 good ones, but Sona says that it's Jorge's decision, and if he forgets, she'll remember for them both. Derek apologizes on Meredith's behalf, leading Sona away. And with Christina, Burke arrives and asks what they are doing with Liz, pulling Christina away. He then makes her let go of Liz, who she's still trying to save. Now, in the case of both of these scenes, I feel like they both have an emotional impact. On the one hand, we're kind of paralleling Ellis forgetting about Meredith to Jorge is now going to forget about Sona because they have to cut out part of his memory in order to deal with the tumor. And Meredith, having the experience with her mother's Alzheimer's, doesn't think that Sona fully understands the impacts that she's about to experience from not being able to be remembered. And then on Christina's side, obviously, despite herself, she ended up attached to Liz, and now she's not willing to let Liz go, and is even willing to go against the rules, which is something that she has never done before this point, in order to try to save her and bring her back, even though she already knew that she was dying of cancer, and even if she brought her back, what would it be for? A day, maybe two? So obviously she's lost her logic head and is again thinking about things with her heart. And for Christina, it's impactful because that's not typical of her character. Izzy watches Mr. Humphrey's surgery from the scrub room with George, asking him if he really felt like she was emasculating him. But he brushes it off, saying he's too masculine to be emasculated, which ends up with them making up. Watching from the side, Bailey tells Dr. Victor that the nerves are viable, suggesting that they save them. But Victor says it will take at least an hour longer and they might not get it all. Bailey says his prognosis is just as good with chemo, when Izzy comes in, siding with Bailey, telling them that Bailey said to give the patient what he wants, and what the patient wants is his nerves. Dr. Victor tries to get Bailey to send Izzy away, but she sides with Izzy, and then the doctor says he'll tell Richard about both of them, but does give in to their united front. Again, I am very critical, and I don't mean to be, but I am. I don't know that the risk of saving his nerves is worth them being reported if Dr. Harry Victor does go through with his threat. Is a stranger patient's ability to use his nerves and be not impotent really worth potentially getting reported and having a black mark on your record at your job? I personally don't think it is, but then we also know that Izzy is very empathetic and she probably does consider it worth it, and that's why she came in and risked siding with Bailey in order to save the nerves. And now we come to our final set of snippet scenes to wrap up all of the various things that are happening in the episode. So Richard and Burke attend to Liz, ensuring that she has actually died, and then Burke lets Christina, or asks Christina if she's ever called time of death before. When she says no, Richard tells her that she can call it. Christina calls time of death before immediately making her escape. Then with Meredith, Sona finishes speaking to Derek, glaring at her as she passes. Then Derek comes over and shakes his head, so she leaves. Clearly, Sona and Jorge have not changed their decision. Burke finds Christina in the stairwell, saying that she can't lose it like that, telling her they have to let her go, and sharing a moment together. Bailey and Izzy scrub out as Bailey asks if she knows that Mr. Humphreys will be thinking about her every time that he uses his nerves, since they were the reason that he kept his nerves. And Izzy says that she does. Sona and Jorge laugh in his room. Meredith then goes to visit her mother, and it briefly shows her helping her downstairs. George gets out of the shower to Izzy brushing her teeth, but this time he lets it go. And then Meredith joins Derek for breakfast. Obviously, the most impactful part of that scene is that there is finally some more relationship progression between Meredith and Derek. They obviously, now she's agreed to go to breakfast. That's a date. That is progress. And we're very happy to see it. Obviously, Christina lost her head, but because it's recognized that she's formed some sort of emotional connection to Liz, they let her do time of death. And then when she makes her escape, Burke immediately goes to comfort her. And as I was saying in the last episode, I really feel that this is around the time where they're starting to be like, okay, this is our second couple. It's also funny because Christina's made several comments now on Meredith sleeping with attendings, and now she's having her moment with Burke. And then there's also the Sona and Jorge thing. They tried so hard to make them likable, and in this case, they actually succeeded in making them a very likable couple. They made it very clear how much they were in love, how much they meant to each other, and the idea that they are now going to be losing that with Jorge's surgery, and that even though they may get an extra 10 years at a maximum, it's going to be 10 years where he doesn't remember, where he's maybe not the same person. And so essentially, he's dying but still going to be there. And that is very tragic. And to think that that's what's going to happen, it is emotionally impactful. But all of our cases for this episode, even the personal dramas, all get handled and tied up with a nice, neat little bow. So now we come to the part of the episode where we do our rankings. As always, we have two ranking lists. We have our mostly objective ranking list, which is mostly objective because my judgment and bias is still impacting the score. The reason it's objective is that there is no emotion involved. But because I made the chart, because I decide what on the chart applies, that is my bias, that is my judgment. So it's only mostly objective. And then the second ranking list is my emotional list. It's my personal list. It's based on how I felt when I was watching the episode, how much the episode impacted me, or how I thought of it, how much I was entertained. So it's the narcissistic list. It's very much about me and what I thought. All right, so for our mostly objective rank values, the chart is on the screen and I've highlighted those that apply. So in this episode, we have the introduction of two single episode supporting characters, which is Liz and Jorge. So that's one for each of them. And then we also have single episode supporting character development. This, I believe, applies to both of them as well. We find out that Liz was Ellis's scrub nurse and had been part of the hospital staff for years. We also get to know a lot about Jorge and Sona, who are so in love and they share a lot of their memories and the things that they might have done together and how they feel about each other in order to get us to care about them. And so I feel like these characters also have a lot of development in this episode. So again, that's another two for each of them, or one for each of them. So a total of 2 points. So that brings us up to 4. Then we have the emotional impact, the successful emotional impact. Of course, when Liz dies, we see how attached Christina began. We see how she freaks out. This impacts us emotionally. And of course, with Jorge and Sona, we obviously have, they made us like them. They made the couple extremely likable. They told us why they were so likable. They told us how in love they were. And then they sprang on us that this is going to be a horrible tragedy and that in fact they are going to lose each other despite saving each other. He got nails in his head, and that he came out fine from that, but cancer's going to take him down and it's incredibly sad and it does hit you in the heart. So it is definitely a successful emotional impact in this episode. Then we also have a +4 for the plot concept itself because nails in somebody's head, that's a very unique concept. That's a very interesting case. And they did add a lot of the drama and other things aside from that. But I feel like that's a strong concept for a case for the episode. It's interesting. It's engaging. You're wondering what's happened to cause that. It makes it more engaging, I should say. And then, of course, we have the main relationship development. Meredith at the end does go on a date with Derek, a breakfast date with Derek. This is progress. She's gone on for the last 3 episodes and most of this 4th episode saying that she's not going to date him, that they aren't going to be a couple, that she is going to deny the feelings that she has and so clearly has. And now finally, at the very, very end, she has decided that she's going to go for breakfast with him. And so we finally get a little bit of development. And so, with all of those together, we're at a score of 15. That's well over 10. There aren't any detractors that I felt from the episode. And so, for this episode on our mostly objective ranking, it is going to be a 10 out of 10 episode. All right, so with our mostly objective ranking list, we do go, if they have the same score objectively, we then do go in the order in which they aired. So in this case, A Hard Day's Night still maintains its spot at number 1, and below that is now No Man's Land in slot 2. Number 3 is The First Cut is the Deepest, and then in 4th place we have Winning a Battle, Losing the War. For my personal ranking, I liked this episode. It had 2 times the emotional impact. Both of the main storylines were very impactful emotionally. We got our progress between Meredith and Derek, finally, after waiting for so long. I still don't really get the model thing. I don't get the tampon thing. I really liked the ending, but a lot of the mid and beginning were kind of, I'm not going to say that they were weak or boring, but they weren't as engaging as the ending. I feel like all of the impact and everything was the end, and the beginning and middle were kind of just building up to that, and therefore not quite as impactful. Though again, I do really like the fact that there were nails in the head as the case. I think that was a strong concept. So taking all of the positives and negatives into account, personally, I think the episode was a 7 out of 10, which is the highest ranking that I've given so far. And so that puts on my personal ranking No Man's Land as number 1, and then A Hard Day's Night in spot 2. Third place, we have Winning a Battle, Losing the War. And then in 4th place, The First Cut is the Deepest. So last but not least on our rankings journey, we now have our series rankings. The series ranking will compare each season to each other based on a percentage score once we've added up all of the scores that we've given per episode. Because there are 8 episodes in the first season, the maximum total score that they can achieve is 80. And so in this case, we are now adding a mostly objective score of 10, which brings up the total score to 29 out of 80. And on the personal side, we're adding 7, which brings us to 21 out of 80 as our score. And with that, we have now rewatched and ranked Grey's Anatomy Season 1, Episode 4, No Man's Land. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.